Uh, I'm going to talk about Wileman and Shelley, mostly Wileman, wall plaques. And what I mean by wall plaques are things that were designed to be hung on the wall. They either have holes in the rim or, in some cases, some added pieces with a hole through it to take wires or cords for hanging. I'm calling them plaques. They've been called other things, plates and so on, but I'm calling them plaques because in a shapes book, an earthenware shapes book, and in an intarsio pattern book, they call them plaques. And in the shapes book, this shows a 12-inch plaque. You can see it's just a series of circles which show presumably what the base rim looked like and so on, but they have a shape number and the word plaque. Now, plaque shape numbers are important because they feature in some of the identification numbers for these. And they had a series of numbers starting at 66 for 14-inch or 356 millimetre diameter. And they went all the way down to 6-inch. But you'll notice that there are two numbers for 12-inch. And the reason for that is that on intarsio, there are two patterns. They started off, I think, with the pattern on the left, and then when they created another pair of patterns, which were identified by A and B, they created a new shape number. And they've done that for a few other patterns in the same situation. The dates, wall plaques seem to have come in the late 1890s, about the same time as intarsio and some of these. A few of them continued into the Shelley era, and then the Shelley potteries were all in the 1930s. Now, I've promoted this idea before, but I think that in 1894, when Wileman opened its new earthenware factory, they needed to distinguish between china and earthenware, and they created three logo and back stamps which were more or less the same. And they were going to call, I think, their earthenware was going to all be faience, or it was going to be semi-porcelain for the high-fired things that they used for hospital wares and toilets and things like that. And then when Frederick Reed became art director, he introduced some new styles, Urbato, Intarsio, Spano Lustra, and then a few years later, Pastello, and they devised a new faience stamp. But I think that the old faience stamp continued with some wares, and it certainly overlapped with the new faience stamp. They didn't drop the old one. And I think that also explains why there was such a diverse range of faience pieces. That's a few that show the range of different wares, which I argue shows that they were going to call a lot of their earthenware faience. There are three groups of Wileman Company wall plaques. The first are identified just by shape numbers, nothing extra. And if there was a pair of them for the same sized plaque, they differentiated them as an A or B. And they duplicated these with intarsio patterns. Then there's a second large group in the 1100s, and these don't use the shape numbers. And these were introduced after Frederick Reed became art director. And then there's a third captioned Dickens series, which used 700s pattern numbers. And finally, at least one other 700 pattern number, which we'll see in due course. Well, we'll start off with the first group, which used just the shape number to identify them. They're printed in blue on white glaze, and they added some colours. And you can see here 14-inch plaque ones, a pair, A and B. Classical ladies, although not from ancient times. The one on the left appears to be sewing, particularly when you see the intarsio picture, which has some brighter colours. And the one on the right's reading a book, but books didn't come in ancient times. They were a little bit later. And some of these, or at least one, had extra colours. You can see the 66B had some extra colouring on one example. And the intarsio duplicate is shown on the right. You can see that the lady does appear to be sewing. The next size down is 12-inch, and I've only ever come across pictures of the one on the right, 68B. I assume there probably was an A, although the A number might have only been used for intarsio. And if there was an A, it would have presumably had the centre from the intarsio, the same pattern. So I've taken an intarsio centre and I've adjusted it to blue colours. There's a 10-inch plaque, only one, and some rats. And when Les Foley was assembling his intarsio book, the first one, he couldn't find a picture of this intarsio plaque, so he took our 10-inch plaque picture and he added the colours according to the pattern book. Later he found an actual example. And a couple more to finish this group. There's an 8-inch plaque of a girl rubbing her iron in bed, and a very small 6-inch plaque with a moonlight scene. The next, and a much bigger group, is the second group, numbered 1100s, and they're on brown earthenware, and they have these extra added little bits on the back so that you can hang them. 1100 numbers are engraved on the back, scratched in with an A or a B, depending on if it's a pair. And I point out that in the 1100 series, it's not just plaques, there's a large number of other bowls and pots, and here's a couple from our collection. Some pieces carry artist names, and the ones I've seen are Banks and Seddon and Hurton Reed, which now brings us to pictures of them. The lowest number is an A and a B, 11037, and it shows a lion and what I presume are wolves, but they seem to be a small difference of opinion. And when we went to England some years ago, we visited in one of our trips Catherine Ingram, and she pointed out the picture on the right, which she'd found in a book, and you'll notice it's very, very similar to the one on the left. Now, the B one isn't signed Seddon as far as I can see, but the one on the right was supposed to be about 1880, but could well have been later. And it doesn't have a name either. It's on a 6-inch by 12-inch plaque. But the pictures are very similar, which raised the question, was the one on the right also by Seddon, or did he use it as an inspiration for the one on the left, which I presume, since it's one of a pair and they use the similar colours and so on, would have been by Seddon. Two more on 14-inch, and one shows a fox and what looks to be some grouse or something taking off. And on the right, a hare and some birds that could be magpies. Some finches amongst grass, also on 14-inch. And some of these grasses have been done by tube lining, I would imagine. They seem to have a few stripes and dots and so on. Two Brittany heads, the one on the left was in our collection at one stage, and it's signed by Seddon, and the inscription is just above the collar on the right-hand side of the plate. And the one on the left, I can't read the signature, but I do know that Banks signed some. And again on 14-inch, a couple of fish plaques with a marine type border. Now down to 12-inch, 2 landscapes in browns and ochres. An 8-inch, which is a heron, or it could be a stork. Storks fly with their necks extended, but this might be a bit of artistic license, and the colours don't actually match any storks or herons that I know of. So I think it's definitely a bit of artistic license, but some flowers in the foreground and the moon in the background. 2 sea views, also on 12-inch, with the matching borders. And this is the same plate, but well, 2 versions of the same pattern. One came from the internet. The one on the right came to me via a query through our internet, and I think its colours are more likely to be accurate than the one on the left, but the colours could have varied a bit. And this I've called City Walls, but some people have called it Castle. And I presume if there is an A, that there is also a B. But I've never seen the B, so if anyone knows where I might get a picture of it, I would very much appreciate it. And in the same outer rim, there is Queen of Hearts, who made some tarts on the left, and the Knave of Hearts stole those tarts on the right. 2 12-inch diameter peacock platters facing different directions and with a fair bit of tube lining to define the pattern. And a bit of a townscape in the left and a windmill on the right. 2 rooster. I don't know what the size of these is, but the one on the left, it came from the internet and it's not a very good picture. The one on the right, I presume the colours are more likely. The one on the left has a much grander tail, so I don't know whether they're supposed to represent 2 varieties or an older and a younger bird. Fish, I would think on a smaller plaque, but I don't know. I've only ever come across the one on the left. I would presume there was probably a matching one since it has an A on it, but I have never come across a picture. So again, if anyone knows or has one, I'd love a picture. And 2 marine scenes. I again don't know the size, but you can see some birds, some crabs, and some sort of seaweed or something growing on the rocks. And another one, I don't know the size. It's unnumbered, but it is signed H. Reed, which I presume would be Hurton Reed, the son of Frederick Alfred Reed. They did work for Wileman and Company for a short time. Right, that brings me to all the pictures I can find of the 1100 series. So we now get to the Dickens stories, and they're all on 12-inch. They all have holes in the rims, and they start off with 4 pattern numbers, but these pattern book pages have disappeared. And I would imagine that they probably gave an individual number to each of the 4 patterns, but a little bit like the hunting scenes, they apparently were re-entered later, and they all use pattern number 7374, and they added to them so that there's a total now of 10 of them instead of the first 4. And the scenes also appeared on a few small china items. We'll start off with Oliver Twist, and please, sir, I want some more. And it would appear that the pictures used on these were taken from illustrated editions of Dickens. Now, Dickens' books were produced over many, many years, and many of them were illustrated. And one of the well-known illustrators was George Marney. Now, in 1871, there was an edition produced which he illustrated, and you can see there that that would appear to be the source of the picture on the left, one that Wileman used. The Artful Dodger. Hello, my Covey, what's the row? And here is also the source, which would again seem to be by George Marney. Squeers School and Mr. Pickwick. Mr. Pickwick's obviously had a good night out. And this one, I've had a quick look at the internet. I haven't done any sort of extensive research, but this was an illustration by Frederick Barnard in one of Dickens' illustrated volumes. And that would appear to be the source that was used for Uriah Heep. And again by Frederick Barnard on the right, which would seem to be the source for Mr. Pecksmith. And another Barnard picture of little Nell and her grandfather. They rested on a green bank by the roadside. But it would seem that they've somewhat simplified it down and used that because the the posture and the clothes seem to be identical. The remaining ones, there's Dolly Varden and her father, Mr. Micawber, and I don't know the sources of these, Mr. Peggotty, Frederick Barnard illustrated book with Mr. Peggotty in it, at Our Saviour's Cross outside the village when I think he was departing to make a family fortune. And I said that these were used on some small china pieces. So here's one example. This is jug shape number 6 in what is generally known as the small china vase and pot series. And you can see a reduced size picture, and the words appear on the back in this case. And I mentioned that there's one other that I've come across, and that's a Delphic green decoration. Now that Delphic green pattern was introduced in 1905, but this one has a late Foley Shelley stamp, so it would appear that the pattern continued on for a few years, or it mightn't have been used on a plaque until much later. But and you can see the hanging holes there for the cord to hang it. And that brings us to the end of the Wileman wall plaque. I can put this in as a Shelley wall plaque since it's got a Shelley back stamp, but I think it's pretty definitely Wileman. Now we get to Shelley wall plaques. They're all made from earthenware, usually a lighter coloured earthenware, and they have base holes in the rim. And there are 2 groups. One is some chintz floral patterns that were used on wall plaques in the 1930s, and again from the 1930s, a big group of harmonyware patterns. These are the only 2 chintz ones I know of, Maytime on the left and Melody on the right. And they're on 14-inch, and all the Shelley wall plaques are on 14-inch diameter. That brings us to harmonyware. Now, Shelley introduced new colours fairly regularly over a few years, and they seem to have made these wall plaques from some of those matching to match some of the colours that they used for their other wares. But these, I presume, have been done by putting the very wet glazes on and then giving it a good spin on a wheel, I think, because it seems to have run, and I believe that's the technique used to produce this type of pattern. There are a lot of different colorways. A lot of them have this radial pattern. And I have grouped them together. And you can see a fair number of color combinations, either with colors either on the inner group or on the outer group. And these look as if they might have been done with a brush, applying big strokes around the rim, splashes of color. And I don't find these patterns as attractive as the radial ones, but there are quite a few of them. They might have been easier to do. And again, some big splashes in greens. And to more or less finish up a radial one and large one. Right, a few acknowledgements. The Plaque pattern book picture was produced with permission from WWRD and the Stoke City Archive. And I'd like to thank fellow collectors who have allowed me to photograph pieces or have sent me some pictures or provided information. And Bruce Till provided most of the pictures of the Harmony Ware wall plaques. Which brings me to the end of my talk. So